I never thought I'd be standing in front of a judge at 72 years old, my hands shaking so badly I had to grip the wooden rail just to stay upright. The courtroom smelled like old books and floor polish, and every sound echoed off those high ceilings like accusations bouncing back at me. When the judge leaned forward and asked, "Mrs. Ellington, can you tell the court why you're here today?" my throat closed up completely. Because across that aisle, sitting calm as Sunday morning beside a man in an expensive suit, was Clarice. My daughter. My only child. The baby girl I'd rocked through colic and nightmares. The little hand I'd held on her first day of school. The bride I'd helped into her wedding dress. And now she sat there looking at me like I was a stranger who'd wandered in off the street. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. How do you explain to a room full of strangers that your own daughter is the reason you're here? How do you say out loud that the person you loved most in this world has turned every law, every system, every protection meant to help elderly mothers like me into a weapon pointed straight at your heart? The judge cleared his throat, and I saw something flicker across his face. Not impatience exactly, but something sharper. He glanced down at the papers in front of him, then back at me, then over at Clarice. His eyes narrowed just slightly, like a man who'd spent 30 years on the bench learning to spot the difference between truth and performance. Do you think parents can love their children too much? Can you give so much, sacrifice so completely, that you actually create the very person who'll destroy you? Tell me what you think in the comments below, because I used to think I knew the answer. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. The bailiff shifted his weight, and the leather of his belt creaked in the silence. Someone in the back row coughed. Clarice's lawyer was writing something on a yellow legal pad, his pen making soft scratching sounds that seemed louder than they should have been. My daughter's face remained perfectly blank, like I wasn't even real to her anymore. "Mrs. Ellington," the judge prompted again, gentler this time. I found my voice somewhere deep in my chest, where all the grief lives. "Your Honor, I'm here because 6 months ago I had a home. I had a life. I had a daughter who called me every Sunday and said she loved me." My voice cracked, but I pushed through. "Now I'm living in a motel off Route 40, and that same daughter is sitting right there trying to convince you I've lost my mind." The courtroom went dead silent. Even the court reporter's fingers paused over her little machine. The judge's expression shifted again, something like recognition crossing his weathered features. He'd seen this before, I realized. Maybe not exactly this, but close enough to know the shape of it. Close enough to suspect what comes next in stories like mine. I looked at Clarice one more time, searching for any trace of the little girl who used to climb into my lap when thunder scared her. Nothing. Her eyes were as empty as hotel windows. "If only I'd never signed those papers," I whispered, not meaning to say it out loud but unable to hold it back. The judge heard me though. His head snapped up, and he leaned forward in his chair. "What papers, Mrs. Ellington?" And that's when I knew. That's when I understood that maybe, just maybe, this judge wasn't going to let my daughter write the ending to this story after all. I met Walter Ellington on a Tuesday in 1971, outside a hardware store in downtown Ashford where I was buying paint for my mother's kitchen. He held the door open for me, tipped his cap, and said something about the weather that made me laugh. I don't even remember what it was now, just that his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, and I thought right then that I wanted to see that smile every day for the rest of my life. We didn't have much back then. Walter worked construction, and I waitressed at the diner on Main Street where the coffee was always too strong, and the tips were never quite enough. But we saved every penny we could, dreaming about a little place of our own. 2 years later, we bought that bungalow on Maple Avenue. It wasn't fancy, just 800 square feet with blue shutters and a porch that sagged a little on one side, but it was ours. Walter fixed that porch the first weekend we moved in. We wanted children right away. I got pregnant 3 times in those early years, and lost them all before the second trimester. The third time broke something in me that I didn't think would ever heal. The doctor said maybe it just wasn't meant to be, like that was supposed to comfort me somehow. Walter held me while I cried for weeks, and we stopped talking about babies after that. We tried to convince ourselves that we were enough, just the two of us in that little house. Then in 1979, when I was 34 and had stopped hoping, I got pregnant with Clarice. I didn't tell Walter for almost 4 months because I was terrified of losing another one, terrified of watching that hope die in his eyes again. But she held on. She was born in March with a full head of dark hair and lungs that could wake the neighbors. Our miracle baby, we called her. Maybe that was our first mistake, treating her like she was made of something more precious than other children. We gave her everything we never had. Dance lessons, piano lessons, the best clothes we could afford. When she wanted a canopy bed like the one in the Sears catalog, Walter built it himself, staying up 3 nights in a row in the garage until it was perfect. When she decided she wanted to go to college out of state, we refinanced the house to make it happen. I remember Walter saying one evening when Clarice was about 16, sitting out on that same porch he'd fixed years before, "Promise me she won't ever lose her way, Marge. Promise me all this love we're pouring into her will matter when we're gone." I squeezed his hand and promised, believing it with everything in me. How could a child raised with that much love ever turn cruel? How could someone we'd sacrificed everything for ever look at us like we were disposable? But here's what I've learned since then, sitting alone in courtrooms and motel rooms. Sometimes the children you love the most are the ones who learn to expect everything and appreciate nothing. Sometimes giving too much teaches them that taking is their birthright. Before I tell you what happened after Walter died, tell me something in the comments. Do you think it's possible to love someone so much that you actually hurt them? Can devotion become a kind of poison if you're not careful? Walter died on a Thursday morning in November, so quietly that I almost didn't notice. He'd been getting weaker for months, the cancer eating through him like rust through metal, but that morning, he just looked tired. I brought him tea the way he liked it, 2 sugars and a splash of milk, and when I came back 5 minutes later to check on him, he was gone.
Just like that.
46 years together, and he left on an ordinary Thursday while I was in the kitchen humming a hymn. The funeral was small. Walter never wanted a fuss. Clarice flew in from Boston where she'd been living with Gregory for 3 years. She cried at the service, real tears that streaked her makeup, and I held her hand thinking at least grief had brought us back together. We hadn't been close since her wedding. She called maybe once a month, always rushed, always with somewhere else to be. But that day she stayed close, helping with the reception, organizing the flowers, being the daughter I'd missed. Gregory came too, of course. I'd only met him twice before, at the wedding and one Christmas dinner that had been awkward and formal. He was the kind of man who wore expensive watches and talked about investments in a way that made you feel stupid for not understanding. But he was polite to me after the funeral, shaking hands with the church ladies and saying all the right things about what a good man Walter had been. A week after we buried Walter, Clarice said she'd handle all the paperwork. "Mom, you shouldn't have to deal with this right now," she said, sitting at my kitchen table with her laptop open. "Let me take care of Dad's insurance, the house deed, all that legal stuff. You just focus on healing." It seemed reasonable. I was so tired, so hollowed out by grief that I could barely remember to eat. The thought of dealing with insurance companies and lawyers made my head hurt. So I said yes. I said thank you. I trusted her because she was my daughter, and because what else was I supposed to do? Gregory came by a few days later with a briefcase full of papers. Just some consolidation forms, he explained, spreading them across the dining room table that Walter had built. "We're putting all of Walter's policies under one umbrella, so they're easier to manage. Standard stuff, but we need your signature in a few places. If you've ever trusted the wrong person with something important, hit the like button right now. Because you'll understand exactly what I'm about to tell you." I signed where Gregory pointed. He showed me the little yellow tabs marking each signature line, explained something about beneficiaries and estate management that went over my head like cloud cover. His voice was smooth, patient, like he was doing me a favor. Clarice stood behind him nodding, saying, "It's fine, Mom. This is just streamlining everything." I signed 7 documents that afternoon. Maybe 8. I stopped counting. When they left, Gregory's smile lingered in my mind, playing on repeat like a song you can't shake. Something about it felt wrong, too satisfied, but I told myself I was being paranoid. Grief makes you suspicious of everything, I thought. These were my daughter and her husband, not strangers trying to rob me. That night I dreamed of Walter for the first time since he died. He was standing at the end of a long hallway calling my name, his voice urgent and afraid. Marjorie, he kept saying. Marjorie, read what you signed. I woke up with my heart hammering and his voice still echoing in my ears, fading like smoke. The first sign something was wrong came 3 weeks later when I got a letter from the county assessor's office about property tax changes. It was addressed to Clarice Ellington Morrison at my address, which didn't make sense. I called to ask her about it, but she didn't answer. She didn't call back for 2 days, and when she finally did, her voice had a new edge to it, sharp and impatient. Mom, it's just a clerical error. Don't worry about it. I'll handle it. But more letters came. Bank statements I didn't recognize. Something from a title company. Each time I asked Clarice, she had the same answer. Don't worry about it, I'll handle it, it's just paperwork cleanup from Dad's estate. Her tone got colder with every call until I stopped asking. Then she started making decisions about my money. Mom, I've set up automatic bill pay for you, she announced one afternoon like she was doing me some great favor. You don't need to worry about writing checks anymore. Everything will come straight out of your account. Except I never agreed to that. And when I tried to access my bank account online, my password didn't work. When I called the bank, they told me I'd authorized Clarice as the primary account manager. I hadn't. Or had I? Was that in those papers Gregory brought? I couldn't remember anymore, and that scared me more than anything. The real nightmare started on a Tuesday in March, almost 4 months after Walter died. I was in the garden planting tomatoes when a moving truck pulled up in front of my house. 2 men got out and started walking up my driveway like they owned the place. Can I help you? I called out, dirt still under my fingernails. The older one, a guy with a gray beard and a clipboard, looked confused. We're here for the property assessment. New owner requested it. New owner. Those 2 words hit me like a fist to the stomach. This is my house, I said, hearing my voice go high and thin. I'm the owner. There's been a mistake. He consulted his clipboard, then handed me a piece of paper that made the whole world tilt sideways. It was a deed transfer document dated January 15th, 2 months earlier. The property at 47 Maple Avenue had been legally transferred from Marjorie Ellington to Clarice Ellington Morrison. My signature was at the bottom, right there in blue ink that looked exactly like my handwriting. If this moment shocked you, please share this story. Because no mother should have to go through what happened next. My hands shook so badly, the paper fluttered like a trapped bird. I called Clarice immediately, not caring that I was crying, not caring that the men were standing there watching me fall apart. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice flat and bored. Mom, I'm in a meeting. They're saying you own my house. They're saying I signed it over to you. Clarice, what did I sign? There was a pause, long enough that I could hear office sounds in the background, someone laughing about something. When she spoke again, her voice was ice. Mom, don't make a scene. You signed the deed transfer months ago. Gregory explained everything to you. This house is too much for you to manage alone. We're going to sell it and use the money to get you somewhere more appropriate. Appropriate? This is my home. Walter and I built our life here. Dad's dead, Mom. And frankly, you're not competent to make these decisions anymore. That's why we're handling it. I'll call you back later. She hung up. My daughter, my miracle baby, hung up on me while I stood in the garden her father had tilled every spring for 40 years, holding proof that she'd stolen everything from me. The motel off Route 40 cost $48 a night, and it smelled like cigarettes and industrial cleaner no matter how many times I opened the window. The wallpaper was peeling near the bathroom, and the TV only got 3 channels, but it was all I could afford after Clarice emptied my savings account. She'd left me exactly $800, like she'd calculated the bare minimum needed to keep her conscience clean. I'd been there 5 weeks. 5 weeks of lying awake listening to trucks rumble past on the highway, 5 weeks of eating from the mini-mart 2 blocks away because I couldn't afford restaurants, 5 weeks of avoiding everyone I knew because I was too ashamed to tell them what my daughter had done. How do you explain to your church friends that you're homeless? How do you admit that your own child looked at you and saw nothing but assets to liquidate? At night, Walter haunted me. Not in a scary way, but in the way grief haunts you when you need someone and they're not there. I'd remember stupid things, like how he always left his coffee cup on the porch railing, or the way he hummed while he read the newspaper. I'd remember him building Clarice's canopy bed in the garage, sawdust in his hair, so proud of himself for getting the posts exactly even. What would he think if he could see her now? Would he believe me? Or would he think I'd done something to deserve this? The shame was worse than the anger. I kept thinking I must have done something wrong, raised her wrong somehow, loved her the wrong way. You don't spend 72 years being a good person just to end up in a highway motel unless you've failed at something fundamental. That's what I told myself anyway, lying on scratchy sheets under a ceiling stained yellow from decades of smokers. Then Clarice called. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and I almost didn't answer because I couldn't take another conversation where she treated me like an inconvenience. But something made me pick up, maybe hope, maybe just muscle memory from a lifetime of answering when my daughter needed me. Mom, we need to meet. Her voice was businesslike, not quite cold, but not warm either. Professional, like I was a client she needed to deal with. There's some insurance stuff from Dad's estate we still need to sort out. Can you meet me at the courthouse on Friday at 10? My heart jumped. Maybe she'd changed her mind. Maybe she'd realized what she'd done and wanted to fix it. Maybe my daughter was still in there somewhere underneath whatever Gregory had turned her into. The courthouse, I asked, trying to keep the hope out of my voice. Yes, just some paperwork we need to file. It'll only take an hour. Can you be there? I said yes before I thought it through, because what else could I say? She was my daughter. She was all I had left of the family Walter, and I built. If there was even a chance she wanted to make things right, I had to take it. Stay till the end of this story, because what happens next will leave you completely speechless. That night I prayed for the first time since Walter's funeral. I knelt beside that motel bed with its cigarette burns and stained carpet, and asked God to give me back my daughter. I asked Walter too, wherever he was, to help her find her way back to the person we'd raised. I whispered his name into the darkness, like a spell that might undo everything that had gone wrong. Friday morning I put on my best dress, the navy blue one I'd worn to Clarice's college graduation, and drove to the courthouse in the old Toyota that was the only thing she hadn't taken from me yet. My hands were steady on the wheel. I felt something like peace for the first time in months, that fragile hope that people can change, that blood still means something, that mothers and daughters don't just stop loving each other. But when I walked through those heavy courthouse doors and into the marble hallway that echoed with every footstep, I saw Clarice already waiting. She was sitting on a bench outside Courtroom 3, and next to her was a man in a gray suit holding a leather briefcase. Her lawyer. My daughter was already sitting beside her lawyer, and she didn't look up when I walked in. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, more like a conference room with wood paneling and fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly overhead. There were maybe a dozen people scattered across the benches, most of them looking bored or tired or both. Clarice sat in the front row with her lawyer, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who kept adjusting his tie. She still hadn't looked at me. The judge entered, and we all stood. He was older, maybe 70, with deep lines around his mouth and eyes that had seen too much human ugliness to be surprised by anything. He settled into his chair, opened a folder, and started reading. The silence stretched out like taffy, sticky and uncomfortable. "This is a petition for legal guardianship," he said finally, looking up at Clarice's lawyer. "Miss Morrison is seeking full guardianship of her mother, Marjorie Ellington, on the grounds of mental incompetence and inability to manage her own affairs. Is that correct?" Mental incompetence. The words hit me like stones. I gripped the bench in front of me so hard my knuckles went white. Clarice's lawyer stood up, smoothed his jacket, and launched into a speech that sounded rehearsed down to the pauses. "Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Ellington is 72 years old and has shown significant decline in her cognitive abilities over the past year. She's been unable to manage her finances, has made irrational decisions regarding her property, and, frankly, poses a danger to herself if left unsupervised." My client, her loving daughter, is requesting guardianship solely to protect her mother's well-being and ensure she receives appropriate care. Loving daughter. I almost laughed, but it would have come out as a sob. The judge looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something shift in his expression. Mrs. Ellington, do you have representation? No, Your Honor. I didn't know I'd need a lawyer. My daughter told me this was about insurance paperwork for my husband's estate. The courtroom got very quiet. Even the clerk stopped typing. The judge leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers, studying Clarice with the kind of look that makes guilty people squirm. She kept her face blank, but I saw her throat move as she swallowed. If you were sitting on that judge's bench right now, what would you be thinking? Would you believe my daughter's story, or would you see through it? Tell me in the comments what you would do. Your Honor, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. I'm not mentally incompetent. I've never been diagnosed with dementia or anything like it. What I am is homeless, because my daughter stole my house. What I am is broke, because she emptied my bank accounts. What I am is heartbroken, because the child I raised, the baby girl I would have died for, looked at me one day and saw nothing but money to take. I took a breath, feeling tears burn behind my eyes, but refusing to let them fall. Not yet. Real love doesn't steal from the people who gave you everything. Real love doesn't lie to your mother and then try to convince a judge she's crazy so you can control what little she has left. Real love doesn't make you stand in a courtroom begging strangers to believe you're still human. The judge was leaning forward now, his eyes sharp and focused entirely on me. The buzzing fluorescent light seemed louder in the silence that followed. Mrs. Ellington, he said softly, these are serious allegations. Do you have any proof of what you're claiming? I looked at my daughter one more time. She was staring straight ahead, her jaw tight, her hands folded in her lap like she was praying. Or maybe like she was trying very hard not to run. And then I smiled through my tears because I thought about the manila envelope in my purse, the one I'd been carrying for 3 weeks like a talisman. Yes, Your Honor, I said.
Ida.
Let me take you back 3 weeks before that courtroom, back to the motel room where I'd been living like a ghost of my former life. It was a Tuesday night, and I was lying in bed staring at water stains on the ceiling, trying to figure out how my life had gotten so small. That's when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Marjorie? Marjorie Ellington. The voice was familiar, but I couldn't place it. It's Nora Hastings. We went to church together years ago, before I moved to Richmond. Nora. I remembered her, vaguely. She'd worked at a law firm downtown, always wore her hair in a neat bun, had a daughter around Clarice's age. Nora, yes. How are you? I'm fine, honey, but I heard through the prayer chain what happened with your house. Marjorie, I'm a legal secretary now, have been for 20 years, and what you're describing sounds illegal. Would you let me look at those papers you signed? I hadn't told anyone at church what happened. The shame was too heavy, too complicated. But apparently someone had noticed me missing from Sunday service, had called around, had pieced together enough to start praying for me. And somehow that prayer chain had reached Nora Hastings in Richmond. God works in strange ways, Walter used to say. I never understood what he meant until that phone call. I met Nora at a diner 2 days later. She brought her reading glasses and a legal pad, and I brought every document I'd managed to keep, including copies of what Gregory had me sign. She spread them across the table next to our coffee cups and studied them for almost an hour while I picked at a piece of pie I couldn't taste. Marjorie, she said finally, looking up with fire in her eyes, these signatures are forged. Not all of them, but at least 3. See here. She pointed to a deed transfer document. The way the G in Ellington loops? That's not how you sign. Compare it to this one, the real one. Someone practiced your signature, but didn't get it quite right. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. Are you sure? I've worked in law long enough to spot a forgery. And look at this. She pulled out another document. This property transfer is dated January 15th, but it was notarized on January 12th. That's impossible. Someone backdated this after you signed the notary page blank. Over the next 2 weeks, Nora helped me gather everything we needed. She called in favors from lawyers she knew, got copies of bank records showing the exact dates my accounts were changed, found a real estate listing for my house that Clarice had posted before she even had legal ownership. Every piece of evidence was like finding a puzzle piece I didn't know was missing. "Why are you helping me?" I asked her one afternoon as we sat in her home office, organizing documents into folders. "You barely know me." She looked at me over her reading glasses, and her eyes were kind but fierce. "Because 20 years ago, my sister's husband did something similar to my mother. We couldn't prove it in time, and Mama died in a state facility thinking we'd abandoned her. I swore I'd never let that happen to another mother if I could help it." The night before the courthouse meeting, I sat in that motel room with all the evidence in a manila envelope. I pulled out the photo of Walter I'd kept in my purse, the one from our 30th anniversary where he's grinning at the camera like he's the luckiest man alive. I kissed it and whispered, "I'm ready now. I'm not a victim anymore." The next morning, walking back into that courtroom with proof in my hands, I wasn't the broken woman who'd been sleeping in a highway motel. I was a mother who'd loved too much, trusted too easily, but refused to disappear quietly. I was testimony that truth doesn't need permission to exist. It just needs someone brave enough to speak it. The judge's chambers felt too small for what was about to happen. He'd called a recess after I mentioned having proof, and now we were all crammed into his office with its law books and family photos and a window overlooking the parking lot. Clarice and her lawyer sat on one side, me on the other, and the judge behind his desk looking through the manila envelope I'd handed him. The silence was excruciating. I could hear every page turn, every breath, the tick of the clock on the wall marking seconds that felt like hours. Clarice's lawyer kept glancing at her, his confidence draining away with each document the judge examined. She sat perfectly still, her face pale, staring at her hands. Finally, the judge looked up. His expression had changed completely from when we'd started this morning. The professional distance was gone, replaced by something that looked like anger mixed with profound sadness. "Miss Morrison," he said, and I noticed he didn't call her by my last name anymore, "I suggest you find a lawyer of your own. A criminal defense lawyer." Clarice's head snapped up.
"What?"
"Your Honor, I don't understand. These documents show clear evidence of fraud, forgery, and elder financial abuse. The signature on this deed transferred doesn't match your mother's verified signature. The notary dates are impossible. Your mother's bank accounts were accessed and drained using power of attorney documents that were never properly executed." He tapped the papers with one finger, each tap like a gavel strike. "This isn't a civil matter anymore. This is criminal." Her lawyer was already standing up, already backing toward the door like the room was on fire. "Your Honor, I had no knowledge of any impropriety. My client came to me with what appeared to be legitimate concerns about her mother's welfare." "Then you were used, counselor. Just like Mrs. Ellington was used. The difference is, she was used by her own daughter." If you felt that moment of truth land, hit the like button. Because this is what happens when quiet persistence meets courtroom justice. Clarice finally looked at me then, really looked at me, and for just a second I saw my daughter again. The real one, buried under whatever she'd become. Her eyes were wide and afraid, and her mouth opened like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time in months, like she'd suddenly woken up and realized what she'd done. "Mom," she whispered, but I looked away. I'd waited months for her to call me that with any real feeling behind it, and now it was too late. The judge closed the folder and stood up. "We're returning to the courtroom, where I'm going to deny this guardianship petition and refer this matter to the district attorney's office. Mrs. Ellington, I'm also issuing an emergency order freezing all assets related to your mother's estate until ownership can be properly restored. Gregory Morrison, your husband, will need to appear for questioning as well." Clarice made a sound then, something between a gasp and a sob. Her lawyer had already disappeared, probably to call his malpractice insurance. She sat there alone on her side of the room, the space between us feeling like miles instead of feet. We walked back into the courtroom, and the judge read his decision into the record. Every word was like a nail in a coffin, final and irreversible. When he said petition denied and called for the bailiff to escort Clarice out, I heard someone in the gallery gasp. She looked back at me one more time as they led her away. Her mascara was running now, her perfect composure cracked wide open. And you know what? I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not revenge, not even relief. Just a deep, bone-tired emptiness where my daughter used to live in my heart. That day, justice didn't shout from the rooftops. It didn't make grand speeches or dramatic gestures. It just whispered the truth in a quiet courtroom while fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and that whisper was louder than all my daughter's lies combined. The investigation took 3 months. I wasn't directly involved, but Nora kept me updated as the district attorney's office built their case. They found everything we'd found and more. Bank transfers to offshore accounts, forged powers of attorney, emails between Clarice and Gregory planning the whole thing step by step like it was a business merger instead of destroying someone's mother. Apparently, I wasn't the first. Gregory had done this twice before, to his own parents and to an elderly aunt. The pattern was always the same. Marry someone with family money, isolate the elderly relative, forge documents, transfer assets, disappear. Except Clarice had gotten greedy, had wanted guardianship too, so she could control everything, and that's where the plan fell apart. That's where I became too visible to ignore. The trial was in September. I didn't attend most of it because Nora said it would be too hard, and she was right. But I was there for the sentencing. I needed to see it end, needed to close that chapter even if it meant ripping out pages of my own history. Clarice looked smaller somehow, sitting at the defendant's table in a gray suit that probably cost more than my first car. She'd lost weight. Her hair was different, shorter, less perfect. When the judge asked if she had anything to say before sentencing, she stood up and turned to face me. If you believe that karma never forgets, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Mom, she said, and her voice broke. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened to me. Gregory, he convinced me that we deserved it, that you wouldn't live much longer anyway, that it wasn't really stealing if it was going to be mine eventually. Tears were streaming down her face now, and part of me, the part that had rocked her through nightmares and held her hand on her first day of school, wanted to run to her. But I stayed in my seat. I was wrong, she continued. I was so wrong, and I'll never forgive myself. You gave me everything, and Her voice failed completely then, and she just stood there crying while her lawyer put a hand on her shoulder. The judge let her compose herself, then spoke in that same quiet, firm voice he'd used months ago in his chambers. Miss Morrison, you took advantage of the person who loved you most in this world. You looked at your elderly mother, recently widowed and vulnerable, and you saw opportunity instead of family. The law takes elder abuse very seriously, and so do I. He sentenced her to 4 years in federal prison for fraud and forgery. Gregory got 7 because of his prior history. They were both let out in handcuffs, and I watched them go, watched my daughter disappear through a door that would lock behind her for a very long time. People asked me later if I felt vindicated, if I felt like justice had been served. The truth is more complicated than that. I didn't press charges myself, the state did that. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted my life back, wanted to sleep in my own bed again, wanted to stop feeling like the world's biggest fool for trusting my own child. What I did feel, sitting in that courtroom watching them take her away, was a strange kind of peace. Not happiness, not satisfaction, but the quiet certainty that I'd stood up for myself when it mattered most. That I hadn't disappeared quietly into whatever facility they'd planned for me. That Walter would have been proud of the woman who fought back instead of just accepting defeat. But what I did next wasn't about revenge or anger or even justice. What I did next was about saving myself. I live by the ocean now, in a small cottage in Delaware that I bought with the money from selling the Ashford house. I couldn't go back there, couldn't sleep in rooms where Walter and I had been happy before our daughter took it all away. Some places hold too many ghosts, too many memories that hurt more than they comfort. My cottage is pale yellow with white shutters, and from my kitchen window I can see the waves rolling in every morning like clockwork. I'm learning to paint, something I always wanted to do, but never had time for. My pictures aren't very good yet, mostly just bad watercolors of seagulls and beach grass, but they're mine. This life is mine, in a way nothing has been mine for a very long time. People at my new church sometimes ask about my family. I tell them I had a daughter once, but we're not in touch anymore. They don't press, which I appreciate. Some losses are too complicated to explain over coffee and donuts in the fellowship hall. Clarice writes to me sometimes from prison. The first letter came 6 months into her sentence, for pages of apologies and explanations and desperate pleas for forgiveness. I read it once and put it in a drawer. The second letter came 3 months after that. I didn't open it. There have been 7 more since then, and they all sit in that same drawer unopened. Maybe someday I'll read them, or maybe I won't. Either way, they're my choice to make. What I've learned, sitting here by the ocean watching storms roll in and clear out again, is that forgiveness isn't something you owe anyone, even your own child. It's not a debt that must be paid or a box that must be checked to prove you're a good person. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is walk away from people who hurt you, even if they share your blood. I've also learned that love without boundaries is just another word for self-destruction. Walter and I loved Clarice so much we forgot to teach her that love has limits, that taking has consequences, that other people's lives matter as much as your own wants. We thought if we just gave enough, loved enough, sacrificed enough, she'd turn out perfect. Instead, we created someone who thought the world owed her everything and she owed nobody anything. The hardest truth I've learned is this. Sometimes the people who hurt you most teach you who you really are. Clarice took my house, my savings, my sense of safety in the world. But she couldn't take my dignity. She couldn't take my ability to fight back. She couldn't take the part of me that Walter loved, the part that survived the depression and 3 miscarriages and 46 years of marriage, and then his death. That part of me was stronger than anything she could do. I may have lost a daughter that day in the courtroom, but I found myself again. I found the woman who doesn't accept injustice just because it comes wrapped in family obligations. I found the mother who knows that real love sometimes means letting people face the consequences of their choices. I found Marjorie Ellington, not as someone's wife or someone's mother, but just as herself. And that, my dear friends, is the truest form of justice. Not the kind that comes from courtrooms and judges and prison sentences, though those matter too, but the kind that comes from looking in the mirror and recognizing the person staring back at you, the kind that comes from knowing you stood up for yourself when everyone expected you to lie down, the kind that comes from survival itself. Sometimes justice shouts, but more often it whispers. And the whisper, quiet and steady and eternal, is enough. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, and share it with someone who needs this reminder today. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another story like this one. Tell us in the comments what this story meant to you, because your thoughts might be exactly what another viewer needs to hear. We're building a family here of people who believe in truth, resilience, and the quiet power of never giving up. Join us, and let's inspire each other with stories that matter.